Captain Sarah Collins walked into the military briefing room with calm confidence. Her uniform was neat, her boots polished, and her short brown hair tied tightly behind her head. The room was filled with senior male officers, talking loudly about strategy and operations. Their voices echoed in the cold, white-lit room. As soon as she entered, a few of them glanced at her, then looked away as if she didn't belong there. Sarah had learned to expect that reaction. In many places, being a woman in uniform was enough to make others underestimate her, even if she had been through more battles than most of them combined. She quietly walked to the corner, taking her place near the wall, waiting for the meeting to begin. The head officer, Colonel Davis, looked at her and said in a casual tone, "Captain, why don't you make yourself useful and bring us some coffee?" His words cut through the air like a cold blade. A few officers smirked, clearly amused. For a second, Sarah wanted to respond. She wanted to remind them that she had once led men like them through gunfire and sandstorms, that she had seen death up close and never flinched. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she took a deep breath, nodded slightly, and walked toward the coffee pot. As she poured the steaming liquid into the cups, her mind went back to the deserts of Afghanistan. Dust, heat, and the sound of helicopters overhead. She could almost smell the gunpowder, feel the adrenaline rush of those impossible missions. She had been a part of Delta Force, the elite of the elite. But that was classified. No one in this room knew that part of her past, and she wasn't about to tell them. She placed each cup carefully on the table, one by one, her movements steady and controlled. She had learned patience in the field, how to wait for the right moment before striking, how to keep her emotions hidden until the time was right. "Thank you, Captain," one of the younger officers said sarcastically. The others chuckled. Sarah just gave a faint smile. She had dealt with worse: enemy interrogations, sleepless nights, and losing teammates. These men's arrogance was nothing compared to that. As the briefing started, she stood quietly at the back of the room. The officers began discussing a rescue mission in a foreign zone. They spoke in big words and confident tones, but Sarah could see the gaps in their plan almost instantly. Their strategy would fail, she knew it. They were relying on satellite data and maps, but not experience. Not the kind that came from real combat. Her instincts told her to speak up, to warn them, but she held back. She had learned that sometimes silence was more powerful than words. Let them talk. Let them think they were in control. While they argued over routes and backup plans, she studied them carefully. Colonel Davis loved to dominate the room. His voice was always louder than everyone else's. Major Thompson was nervous, hiding it behind forced confidence. The others followed whoever spoke the loudest. Sarah's sharp eyes caught every detail. At one point, Davis turned to her and said, "Captain, take notes. You can type this up later." She simply nodded. It didn't matter. She knew she wasn't there to impress anyone. But inside her pocket, her fingers brushed against a small, smooth ring. Her Delta Force ring. The symbol of the unit that didn't officially exist, at least not on paper. It was earned only through years of training, pain, and survival. Most people in the military had never even met a Delta Force operator in person. She remembered the day she got it, the night mission in Kandahar that went wrong. She had led her team through chaos, brought them home, and refused evacuation until everyone was safe. That mission had changed her life and her reputation. But after it, she was reassigned to a lower post, told she needed recovery time. It was the military's quiet way of saying they didn't know what to do with her anymore. Now here she was, back in a room where no one knew who she really was. To them, she was just another officer, maybe a secretary in uniform. But Sarah didn't mind. She didn't wear the uniform for attention. She wore it for the people she had lost, for the missions that still haunted her dreams, and for the quiet pride of knowing she had done something meaningful. As the officers continued talking, one of them dropped a folder. Sarah bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. Their eyes barely met. Yet, in that moment, there was something strong and unspoken in her calmness, a kind of authority that didn't need words. When the projector flickered and the room dimmed slightly, she moved toward the window and looked outside for a second. Soldiers marched across the base. Helicopters lifted off in the distance. The air smelled of metal, oil, and discipline. It reminded her of why she joined in the first place: to serve, to protect, not to be seen. As she turned back to the room, the general hadn't arrived yet. She knew this meeting was just the beginning. Something told her that soon, everything would change. She didn't know how or when, but fate had a way of revealing truth at the right time. For now, she waited silently, coffee cups on the table, a secret ring on her hand, and a storm of memories behind her calm eyes. The officers might have seen her as just a helper, but they had no idea who was really standing among them. A soldier whose quiet strength had once changed the course of a mission and soon would change the course of their respect forever. Years before that meeting room moment, Sarah Collins had lived a completely different life. A life full of danger, secrets, and courage. She had not always been the quiet officer serving coffee in a base full of egos. She had once been a warrior whose name carried weight in places no one could talk about. Sarah had joined the army at 20. She was young, disciplined, and fierce, with a fire that most people couldn't understand. While others trained to become ordinary soldiers, she trained to become extraordinary. She pushed herself harder than anyone else, running longer, shooting straighter, and thinking faster. Many of her male teammates used to joke that she would never last, but she never argued. She just kept proving them wrong. Her determination caught the eye of a commander from Delta Force, a unit so secret that even within the military, few people knew its real missions. Getting selected for Delta Force was almost impossible. Only the best of the best made it. The physical and mental training was brutal. Sleepless nights, endless runs, cold nights in the mountains, and missions where failure meant death. Sarah went through all of it without quitting once. She was smaller in size than most men, but she had something far more powerful: focus. She didn't complain, didn't show weakness, and never gave up. Her instructors soon learned that beneath her calm face was a soldier made of iron. After months of tests and operations, she earned something no one could take from her: the Delta Force ring. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a silent symbol that said she had done what most soldiers could only dream of. It meant she had faced death and survived it. It meant she was one of them, one of the ghosts who operated where no flag was flown. Her first mission came sooner than she expected. A hostage rescue deep inside foreign territory. The plan was dangerous. The enemy camp was heavily guarded, and the team had to move in complete silence. Sarah moved like a shadow through the desert night. The stars above were the only witnesses to what happened that night. Shots fired, explosions echoed, and lives were saved. When the sun rose, her team was battered but alive. After that, everyone in her unit started calling her the Ghost. She could appear and disappear in the field without a sound. Her sharp eyes, quick reflexes, and calm mind made her one of the best operatives on the team. But the mission that changed everything came 2 years later, a secret operation in Kandahar. Her team had been sent to extract a local informant who had information that could save hundreds of lives. It was supposed to be a quick mission, in and out. But things went wrong. The informant was captured before they reached him, and the enemy forces surrounded their exit route. Under heavy fire, her team leader was injured. Sarah took command without hesitation. With bullets flying all around, she led her men through narrow alleys and rough terrain. They were outnumbered but refused to give up. At one point, Sarah shielded a wounded soldier, taking shrapnel to her shoulder but kept moving. Hours later, she got her team to safety. Every single one of them. The mission was completed. The informant was saved. And though her arm bled through her uniform, she didn't stop until everyone was on the helicopter. That day, the stories of the Ghost of Kandahar began to spread quietly within the ranks. She was awarded a medal, but in secret. Delta Force missions were classified. No one outside needed to know. She was proud, but she also carried memories that haunted her. The sounds of explosions, the faces of fallen comrades, the heavy silence after the fight. When she came back home, something inside her had changed. She wasn't the same soldier anymore. The higher-ups decided she needed rest, maybe therapy. Instead of being sent back to the field, she was reassigned to a headquarters role, paperwork, reports, and attending briefings. For a warrior like Sarah, that felt like a cage. She didn't argue with her superiors. She knew how the system worked. Once you'd seen too much, they often put you away quietly, far from the action. She understood. But deep inside, she missed the field, the teamwork, the purpose, the clarity that came with every mission. Now, years later, as she stood in that meeting room serving coffee, all those memories stayed alive inside her. The sound of her commander's voice during battle, the smell of dust and gunpowder, the rush of saving lives. They all lived in her mind like an old movie playing behind her calm eyes. No one in that room knew that the woman they dismissed as an assistant had once led men through fire. No one knew that her quiet hands had held both a rifle and the lives of her brothers in arms. No one saw the weight she carried, the pride, the pain, and the silence of a true soldier. But Sarah wasn't bitter. She had learned long ago that true strength didn't need to shout. It only needed to stand tall. And so, she wore her uniform with quiet dignity. The Delta Force ring on her hand was her secret, a reminder of who she really was. She didn't need others to recognize her worth. She already knew it. But destiny had a strange way of revealing truth. Soon, someone in that very room would notice that small silver ring, and everything would change. The ghost of Kandahar wasn't gone. She was just waiting. The meeting room buzzed with noise as the officers argued over maps and mission plans. Everyone wanted to be the loudest voice in the room, the smartest person at the table. But in the corner, Captain Sarah Collins stayed silent. She had finished serving the coffee and now stood quietly, her hands behind her back, her face calm and unreadable. They thought she was just there to take notes or follow orders. To them, she was a background figure, someone with no real importance. But Sarah's sharp eyes caught every detail, every mistake, every weakness in their plan. Years of real combat experience had taught her how to spot danger before it happened. These men might have higher ranks, but they had no idea how the battlefield truly worked. Colonel Davis, the man leading the meeting, pointed at a map on the screen. "We'll deploy 2 teams through the north side," he said confidently. "It's the least guarded area according to satellite images." Sarah frowned slightly. She knew that kind of thinking could get soldiers killed. She had learned the hard way that maps and satellite images could never replace instincts and ground experience. The north side might look safe from above, but terrain and enemy traps often told a different story. She thought about speaking up but stopped herself. It wasn't her place, at least not yet. She had seen how men like Davis reacted when someone they underestimated tried to correct them. They would laugh, ignore her, or worse, call her emotional. She had no interest in giving them another reason to mock her. One of the younger officers leaned back in his chair and said, "Captain, you're quiet. Taking notes?" His tone was teasing. A few others chuckled. Sarah gave a polite smile. "Just listening, sir," she replied softly. Inside, she felt that old spark of frustration. It wasn't anger, it was something deeper. She had faced enemy fire. She had seen her brothers fall beside her. And yet here she was, being treated like a secretary. But Sarah was too smart to react. In Delta Force, she had learned one golden rule: patience wins battles. Sometimes letting others underestimate you was an advantage. As they continued, Davis asked another officer, "Lieutenant Parker, what's your backup route if the north side fails?" Parker flipped through his papers, stuttering slightly. We'd retreat through Sector 3, sir." Sarah's eyes narrowed. Sector 3. She remembered it. It was a narrow valley, open, exposed, and dangerous. Any trained enemy sniper would have full view of that area. If a team tried to retreat through there, they would never make it. She wanted to warn them, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't her time yet. Her mind worked quietly, building the real plan in her head. She analyzed every route, every timing issue, every risk they were missing. Her brain, trained from years of elite missions, couldn't help but run scenarios automatically. While the others debated loudly, Sarah's mind was 10 steps ahead. At one point, the projector stopped working, and Davis grew irritated. "Captain, fix this," he ordered impatiently. Sarah moved to the laptop, adjusted a few cables, and within seconds, the map returned to the screen. "Good," he muttered, not even thanking her. She nodded and stepped back. It didn't bother her anymore. Respect wasn't given through words. It was earned through actions. And Sarah knew that one day, her actions would speak louder than any of their ranks or egos. Still, a small part of her wished they knew who she really was. That behind her calm face was a soldier who had once led rescue teams into enemy strongholds. That the hand holding the laptop cable had also held the hand of a dying teammate, whispering that everything would be okay. The room smelled of coffee and tension. Papers shuffled, pens clicked, and arguments grew louder. Major Thompson slammed his hand on the table. "We don't have time for second guesses," he snapped. Sarah looked at him silently. She could tell he was scared. His anger came from uncertainty. It was something she had seen many times in the field. People shouted the most when they were unsure. As the meeting dragged on, Sarah stood straighter. The fatigue in the room grew, but she remained focused. Her discipline was unshakable. Every detail mattered to her, the timing of the attack, the terrain, the extraction routes. She could see how everything might go wrong if they continued with their current plan. Her instincts whispered that something big was coming. Maybe not today, but soon. And when that moment arrived, these men would need someone like her. Someone who had lived through the chaos, not just studied it from a safe distance. Finally, the colonel turned off the projector. "We'll finalize the details once the general arrives," he said. "Until then, everyone stay ready." Sarah nodded silently. The general. She had heard of him. A man with real battlefield experience, unlike most of the officers in this room. She wondered if he would recognize her name. Probably not, her missions had been buried in classified files. Still, something in her heart told her that this meeting was about to take a different turn. As the others packed their papers and chatted, she stayed behind for a moment, clearing the table. One of the cups spilled slightly, and she wiped it gently with a napkin. Her hand brushed against her ring, the small, silver Delta Force insignia catching the light for just a second. None of the officers noticed. They were too busy talking. But soon, that ring would speak louder than anything she could say. It held her story, every scar, every mission, every life saved. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, her expression calm but thoughtful. She remembered the soldiers she had led, the nights she had prayed to make it out alive, and the brothers she had promised to never forget. These men in the room thought they were warriors. But Sarah knew the difference between training for war and surviving one. She wasn't there to prove herself. She was there because fate had a plan, one that neither she nor they could yet see. And somewhere deep inside her, she knew that the moment the general walked through that door, her hidden identity, the ghost of Kandahar, would no longer be a secret. The meeting room fell into a quiet hum as the officers shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. The sound of boots echoed down the hallway outside. Everyone straightened their backs because they knew who was coming. The general. The man whose presence could silence a room with a single look. Sarah stood near the back wall, her posture straight, her face calm. She had seen many high-ranking officers before, but this one was different. General Robert Whitmore had a reputation. A man who had seen real combat. A leader respected not for his medals, but for the lives he had saved. The door opened with a firm click, and the general stepped in. His uniform was crisp, his steps heavy but confident. The air in the room seemed to tighten as every officer stood to attention. The general's eyes swept across the room. Cold, focused, missing nothing. "At ease," he said in a deep voice that carried quiet authority. Everyone sat down quickly. Sarah moved quietly toward the table, placing a fresh cup of coffee near his seat. She did it without drawing attention, just as she had done for the others earlier. But as she set the cup down, the general glanced at her briefly. Just a moment, nothing more. Yet in that brief second, something caught his eye, a glint of silver on her right hand. It was small, almost hidden under her sleeve, but unmistakable to someone who knew. The Delta Force ring. His hand, halfway to the cup, froze. His eyes narrowed slightly, his mind racing. That ring wasn't something just anyone could wear. It wasn't jewelry, and it wasn't decoration. It was earned through fire, blood, and impossible missions. He looked up at her face again, more closely this time. There was something familiar about her. He had seen that calm expression before, somewhere far away years ago. Maybe in a dusty field briefing in Afghanistan or through a video report of a classified rescue mission. "Captain," he said slowly, his voice curious now. "Collins, is it?" All the officers turned their heads toward her. The room grew still. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied quietly, her tone respectful but steady. The general leaned back slightly, studying her face. "Collins," he repeated. "As in Captain Sarah Collins. Delta?" The room went completely silent. The officers looked at each other, confused. A few frowned, not understanding. Delta? What did that mean? But one of them, Major Thompson, blinked as realization slowly dawned. The general's eyes softened a little. "I never thought I'd meet the ghost of Kandahar in person," he said, almost in disbelief. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. The ghost of Kandahar. A name whispered in military circles. A legend of a soldier who had led her team through a deadly mission years ago and brought them all back alive. Sarah's expression didn't change. She didn't smile or deny it. She simply said, "Yes, sir. That was a long time ago." The officers who had made her serve coffee now sat frozen in embarrassment. The same woman they had ignored, joked about, and treated like an assistant was a decorated Delta Force operative. One of the best. The general gave a small, respectful nod. "It's an honor, Captain. You saved good men out there. Some of them were mine." For the first time, Sarah met his eyes directly. There was mutual respect, soldier to soldier. She didn't need praise, but his recognition meant something. Colonel Davis tried to speak, but his words stumbled. "Sir, we didn't know." The general looked at him sharply. "Didn't know? Maybe next time, you should look at what's on a soldier's hand before you decide they're only good for coffee." His tone wasn't angry, it was firm, disappointed. Sarah stayed silent. She didn't want revenge or apology. That wasn't who she was. But inside her, a small wave of pride warmed her chest. Not the pride of being noticed, but the pride of being understood. The general gestured toward the empty chair beside him. "Captain Collins, join me." She hesitated for a second, not out of fear but habit. For months, she had stayed quiet, keeping her identity hidden. But now the moment had come. She stepped forward and took the seat beside the general. All eyes followed her. The same men who had smirked earlier now couldn't meet her gaze. The room felt heavier, filled with unspoken shame and new respect. The general sipped his coffee, then said, "Gentlemen, I want you to know something. Captain Collins isn't here to serve coffee. She's here because she's one of the finest tactical minds this force has ever produced." He turned to her. "Captain, you've seen more than most of us in this room. What's your take on this mission?" Sarah looked at the map on the screen. Her voice was calm but clear as she said, "Sir, if the teams go through the north side, they'll walk into an ambush within the first 10 minutes. The room stirred. Davis frowned. "How can you be sure?" She stood and walked closer to the board. "Because I've seen that terrain before," she explained. "The high ridges here and here are perfect sniper points. The route looks safe from above, but the ground tells a different story. You'll lose men before the second checkpoint." Her tone was confident, professional, the voice of someone who knew what she was talking about. The general nodded slowly. "Go on." She continued, outlining an alternative plan, quieter, smarter, using diversion tactics and night cover. Every word she spoke came from real experience, not theory. As she finished, the room was silent again. But this time, out of respect. The general smiled faintly. "You see, gentlemen? That's why we listen before we judge." Sarah sat down again quietly, her job done. She didn't need applause. She never had. As the meeting went on, the officers' attitudes had completely changed. No one looked at her the same way anymore. To them, she wasn't the woman who brought coffee. She was the ghost, the one who had seen what war really meant and still stood strong. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt seen. Not for her uniform, not for her gender, but for her worth. And as she glanced at the general beside her, she realized something. Maybe fate had brought her back here not to remind others who she was, but to remind herself that she still belonged where she had always been, among the warriors. For a few long seconds, no one in the room moved. The officers who had once laughed now sat stiff and silent, staring at Sarah with disbelief. The general's words still echoed through the air. I never thought I'd meet the ghost of Kandahar in person. The title alone carried a weight they could all feel. Sarah didn't want the attention. She didn't crave the whispers or the sudden respect. She simply wanted to do her duty. But she could sense how the mood in the room had completely changed. Just minutes ago, she had been invisible, a background figure with a coffee pot. Now every eye followed her every move. The general leaned forward, his hands clasped. Captain Collins, he said in a tone of real interest. Your record is impressive. Tell me, are you fully cleared for field duty again? Sarah met his gaze calmly. Yes, sir, she replied. Medically and physically cleared 6 months ago. I was reassigned here for temporary evaluation. The general nodded slowly, almost as if the thought of her sitting behind a desk offended him. Temporary evaluation, he repeated with a hint of a smile. Seems like a waste of skill to me. Colonel Davis shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He cleared his throat. Sir, I wasn't aware of her background, he said, trying to sound respectful. Her file must have been classified, the general finished sharply. Of course it was. You don't just read about Delta operatives. You earn the right to know about them. Davis fell silent again. The general turned his attention back to Sarah. You were the one who led the rescue team in Kandahar, weren't you? The one that brought out the hostages under heavy fire. Sarah gave a small nod. Yes, sir. But I didn't do it alone. My team deserves the credit. That simple answer impressed the general even more. Most people would have used that moment to brag, to shine. But Sarah stayed humble, steady, grounded. Across the table, the younger officers exchanged nervous glances. They couldn't believe that the quiet woman they had mocked was the same legend they'd read whispers about in restricted reports. One of them whispered, She's that Collins? Another replied softly, The ghost of Kandahar. I thought that was just a story. The general heard them and smiled faintly. Not a story, he said. A soldier. He stood and walked around the table, his boots clicking against the floor. He stopped near Sarah, studying her ring for a moment, the one with the small Delta insignia. I've seen this ring only a few times in my life, he said. Each time, it belonged to someone who had faced hell and come back stronger. Sarah lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back at him. With respect, sir, I just did what had to be done. The general nodded approvingly. That's exactly what separates soldiers from heroes. He turned to the rest of the room. Gentlemen, he said firmly, let this be a reminder. Rank and gender don't define a soldier, actions do. This captain right here has done more for this country than most of us ever will. The officers nodded quietly, shame visible on their faces. The earlier arrogance in their posture had faded completely. Even Colonel Davis, who had ordered her to pour coffee, now couldn't meet her eyes. Sarah wished he wouldn't feel embarrassed. She wasn't angry at them anymore. She understood their mindset, the same old problem that had followed her throughout her career. People saw her uniform, but not the person who had earned it. The general went back to his seat. Now, he said, tapping his pen on the table, let's return to the mission plan. Captain Collins, you've already pointed out the flaws in the northern route. Walk us through your alternative strategy. Sarah stood up. She wasn't nervous. She had briefed teams before, just not in rooms where everyone doubted her. But now, as she spoke, the silence was different. It wasn't dismissive, it was attentive. She walked to the screen and used the laser pointer. If we reroute through the western ridge, she explained, we can move under cover of terrain. The valley will hide us from drone detection. We'll need to move at night, but it's safer. There's a cave system here. perfect for temporary shelter if extraction is delayed. Her tone was calm and confident, and every word made sense. The general listened closely, nodding. Excellent. And your extraction plan? Sarah smiled slightly. Helicopter from Sector 5, sir. But only once ground confirmation is secure. Otherwise, we risk giving away our position. The general leaned back. You've thought this through. Sarah gave a simple reply. It's what I used to do, sir. For the next half hour, the meeting continued, but this time it was different. The officers asked her questions, and she answered each one clearly. They took notes, they nodded, they listened. Even Davis began addressing her with genuine respect. When the plan was finalized, the general stood. Good work, Captain. You just saved lives today, and not for the first time. Sarah saluted him. Thank you, sir. As the general left the room, the other officers stayed silent. Slowly, they began gathering their papers. One by one, they approached Sarah. Major Thompson spoke first, awkwardly. Captain, I owe you an apology. Sarah smiled politely. No apology needed, Major. We all have things to learn. Another officer added quietly, You've earned my respect, ma'am. Sarah nodded again, her smile small but warm. She didn't need praise. Respect was enough. When the room finally emptied, Sarah stood alone for a moment. The coffee pot was still there, half full. She looked at it and chuckled softly. Just an hour ago, they saw her as a helper. Now they saw her as what she had always been, a soldier. She looked down at her Delta ring, twisting it gently between her fingers. It wasn't pride she felt, it was peace. She had never needed the world to know who she was. But today, for the first time in a long while, the truth had spoken for itself. As she walked out of the room, the sunlight from the hallway touched her face. The base outside was alive with movement. Soldiers training, trucks rolling, planes roaring. Sarah took a deep breath. The ghost of Kandahar had been seen again. Not on the battlefield this time, but in a place where respect was finally earned, not through titles but through truth. The next morning, the atmosphere in the base felt different. The story of what happened in the briefing room had quietly spread through the ranks. Soldiers whispered as they passed Captain Sarah Collins in the hallway. They didn't say much, but their eyes showed a new kind of respect, the kind that comes from hearing a legend was walking among them. Sarah didn't pay attention to the whispers. She moved through her day as usual, calm, disciplined, and focused. But inside, she could feel the change. The same officers who once ignored her now greeted her with polite nods. Even Colonel Davis, who had told her to serve coffee, had started treating her with formality. It was strange, but Sarah wasn't angry. She didn't want anyone to feel sorry or guilty. She only cared that they now understood what real respect meant. Later that afternoon, another meeting was called. This time, Sarah was seated at the main table beside the general, not standing at the back. The same officers from the previous day were there too, all sitting a little straighter, a little quieter. The general began. Captain Collins has made some excellent adjustments to our mission plan. Today, she'll walk us through the final strategy. Sarah nodded and stood up. Her voice was steady and confident as she explained the operation. She pointed to the digital map and highlighted every risk area, every backup route, and every extraction point. She spoke from experience, not theory, and it showed. The general occasionally asked questions, and she answered each one with clear logic. Every now and then, one of the officers would look at her, remembering how they had treated her before. The embarrassment was still visible, but mixed with genuine admiration. When she finished, the general looked around the room and said, "This plan will save lives. Remember that." Then he turned to Sarah. "Captain, excellent work." "Thank you, sir," she replied simply. After the meeting ended, the officers slowly approached her. One by one, they offered quiet words of respect. Major Thompson said, "Captain, your insight yesterday, it changed the whole operation. I owe you for that." Sarah gave a small smile. "We all owe each other, Major. That's how teams survive." She meant every word. She didn't hold grudges. She knew soldiers made mistakes, not always out of pride, but out of habit. Most of them had never seen a Delta Force operative before, especially not a woman. She understood that change took time, but at least it had started. Later, as the sun began to set, Sarah walked across the base toward the training field. The air smelled of dust, oil, and jet fuel, the familiar scent of military life. A group of younger soldiers were practicing shooting drills nearby. When they noticed her, they paused for a moment, then went back to their work, trying harder than before. One of them, a young private, jogged up to her and said nervously, "Ma'am, is it true? You're the ghost of Kandahar." Sarah chuckled softly. "That's what they say. But ghosts don't talk, Private." He smiled, saluted her, and ran back to his team. Sarah watched them for a moment, remembering herself at that age. Full of energy, courage, and a bit of fear. She knew that behind every uniform was a human being trying to prove their worth. As she turned to leave, she saw the general walking toward her. "Evening, Captain," he greeted warmly. "Evening, sir," she replied. The general smiled faintly. "You've caused quite a storm around here," he said. "Half the base can't stop talking about you." Sarah laughed quietly. "I didn't mean to cause one, sir." He nodded. "I know. But sometimes the truth shakes people up, especially when it challenges what they think they know." They walked side by side along the field. The general continued, "You know, Collins, I've worked with many soldiers in my career. Some had skill, others had heart. You've got both. The kind of balance this army needs more of." Sarah looked at him gratefully. "That means a lot, sir. But I'm just doing my job." "That's what makes you special," he said softly. "The best soldiers never see themselves as heroes." They stopped near the fence, watching the horizon turn orange with the setting sun. Helicopters were returning from drills, their rotors slicing through the evening air. For a while, they both stood in silence, sharing the quiet understanding that only veterans of war could feel. Finally, the general spoke again. "You've proven something important not just to them but to this entire base. You showed them that leadership isn't about gender or rank. It's about courage." Sarah looked down at her Delta Force ring. The metal glinted in the dying sunlight. "Courage," she repeated softly. "It's not about never being afraid, sir. It's about moving forward even when you are." The general smiled proudly. "Exactly." He turned to leave but stopped and said, "You know, I could use someone like you in the next operation. Not behind a desk this time. Think about it." Sarah's eyes lit up, though she tried to hide her excitement. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'll be ready." "I don't doubt it for a second," he said before walking away. Sarah stood there for a long moment, feeling the cool wind against her face. Her mind wandered back to the battlefield. The sand, the noise, the fear, and the adrenaline. It had been years since she had felt that spark. The feeling of being useful, being trusted, being exactly where she was meant to be. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive again. As night fell, she returned to her quarters. On her small desk lay an old photo, her Delta Force team, smiling in dusty uniforms, their arms around each other after a mission. She picked it up, tracing her fingers over their faces. "We did it again," she whispered. "We're still making a difference." She placed the photo back and looked out the window. The base lights flickered in the distance, and the stars began to appear above the dark sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, maybe even a new mission. But for now, Sarah was at peace. She had reminded others, and herself, that respect isn't given, it's earned. And the woman they once told to serve coffee had just served something far greater. A lesson in strength, humility, and honor. The next few days passed quietly, but the peace didn't last long. Early one morning, Sarah was called to the command office. The general's assistant handed her a sealed folder and said, "The general wants you to review this immediately, ma'am. It's classified." Sarah nodded, took the folder, and stepped into a small conference room. She opened it carefully. Inside were mission files, maps, and photographs. Her eyes scanned the pages, and her heart tightened. The mission location was in a hostile zone, the same region where she had lost teammates years ago. The general entered moments later. "Captain Collins," he said firmly, "I need your expertise. We're sending a small unit to extract an intelligence officer who went missing 2 days ago. Enemy forces are active and we have limited time. I want you on the team." Sarah closed the folder slowly. "Sir, I know that area. It's dangerous. The terrain is rough, and enemy patrols use it as a trap zone." The general nodded. "That's exactly why I need you. You've operated there before. You know how to get people out alive." There was silence for a moment. Sarah looked down at the photos again, the damaged vehicle, the smoke in the valley, the coordinates circled in red. Memories of gunfire, explosions, and screams echoed faintly in her mind. She had promised herself she'd never go back there. But she also knew what it meant when someone was missing behind enemy lines. She couldn't refuse. She looked up. "When do we leave?" The general's expression softened slightly. "I knew you'd say that. Wheels up at 0400 hours. Briefing in 1 hour." Sarah nodded and saluted. "Understood, sir." After he left, she took a deep breath. She wasn't afraid, but she was alert, focused, aware. She had done this many times before, but this mission felt heavier. Maybe because it would be her first time back in the field after years away. Maybe because she wanted to prove that she still had what it took. She went back to her quarters and opened her locker. Her old gear was still there, the same boots, the same black tactical vest, the same gloves. As she ran her hand over the material, she smiled faintly. "It's been a while," she whispered. When she put on her uniform and checked her equipment, something inside her shifted. The quiet, gentle captain from the base was gone. The soldier within her, the ghost of Kandahar, had returned. At the briefing, the small team gathered around a map. The general spoke clearly. "Your target is a downed recon officer, last seen near the Valley of Shiran. Communication is lost, but satellite images suggest he's alive. Collins, you'll lead navigation and tactics. Sergeant Lopez will handle comms, and Lieutenant Rayner will cover extraction." Sarah nodded at her teammates. They looked younger but eager. She saw a bit of herself in them, brave but untested. As they reviewed the route, Lopez asked, "Captain, have you operated in Shiran before?" Sarah looked at the map quietly. "Yes, once, and it nearly cost me everything. But this time we'll be smarter." The general looked around. "You have 48 hours to get in and get out. No unnecessary risks. Bring our man home." When the team boarded the helicopter before dawn, the air was cold and sharp. Sarah sat by the door, watching the base lights fade below. The rhythmic thump of the rotors filled her ears, blending with her heartbeat. As the sun began to rise, the mountains appeared, vast, rugged, and golden under the morning light. She remembered every ridge, every shadow. "It hasn't changed," she thought. "Neither have I." They landed miles away from the target to avoid detection. Once on the ground, Sarah led the team through the rocky terrain, moving silently. Every sound mattered, every step, every breath. By nightfall, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Using her binoculars, Sarah spotted faint movement near a destroyed vehicle. "That's him," she whispered. "We've got visual confirmation." They planned their approach carefully. Sarah gave hand signals, 2 to the left, 1 behind her. They moved like ghosts through the darkness. Suddenly, a flare lit up the sky. Enemy patrols nearby. The team froze. Sarah's instincts kicked in immediately. "Down! Stay low!" she hissed. Gunfire erupted in the distance. Dust filled the air. They crawled behind rocks, returning quiet, controlled shots. Sarah's aim was precise, every move measured. The younger soldiers followed her lead, their trust in her absolute. When the gunfire stopped, they waited, listening. Then Sarah gave the signal to move again. They found the missing officer unconscious but alive near the wreck. His leg was injured, but he managed a weak smile when he saw her. "Delta Force?" he asked faintly. Sarah nodded. "You're safe now." They carried him out slowly, avoiding enemy routes. Hours passed. The night grew colder. At one point they heard footsteps, more patrols. Sarah motioned for silence and led them into a small cave hidden by rocks. They waited there until the danger passed. Inside the cave, the team caught their breath. The young lieutenant looked at her and whispered, "Ma'am, how do you stay so calm?" Sarah smiled faintly in the dark. "You don't let fear lead you. You lead it." The words stayed with them. By dawn, they reached the extraction point. The helicopter was already waiting. As they climbed aboard, Sarah looked back one last time at the valley. The same place that had haunted her memories, now it felt different. She had faced it again and won. When they landed back at the base, the general was waiting. As soon as he saw the rescued officer, he saluted Sarah. "Outstanding work, Captain. You've just brought another one home." Sarah returned the salute. "Team effort, sir. They did great." The general nodded proudly. "You've proven once again that ghosts never fade. They just wait for the right moment to rise." Sarah smiled softly. The ghost of Kandahar was back. Not for fame, not for recognition, but because duty had called and she had answered. And deep down, she knew this mission wasn't just about saving someone else. It was about saving a part of herself she thought she had lost long ago. Back at the base, the morning air was fresh, and the sun painted the sky in gold and pink. The mission was over, but its impact still echoed through everyone who had been part of it. Sarah stepped off the helicopter, her uniform covered in dust, her eyes tired but sharp. The rescued officer was safe and being taken to the medical wing. As she watched the medics rush him inside, a wave of relief washed over her. Another life saved, another promise kept. The general approached her with a proud smile. "Captain Collins," he said, his voice warm but full of authority. "You did it again. You brought them all home." Sarah saluted him. "Just doing my job, sir." He nodded. "You always say that, but what you do goes beyond a job. It's leadership, courage, and heart. You reminded everyone here what real service looks like." Sarah gave a small smile. "Thank you, sir." He paused for a moment, looking at her Delta Force ring glinting in the sunlight. "You know," he said quietly, "some soldiers wear their medals. You wear your story." Sarah didn't reply, she just nodded because he was right. Every scar, every memory, every loss she had faced was part of who she was. She didn't need medals to prove her worth. After the debriefing, Sarah went to her quarters. She placed her gear back in the locker and sat down for the first time in hours. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was at peace. For years, she had lived with the question, whether she still belonged out there, whether she was still capable of making a difference. The mission had answered that question. As she looked around the quiet room, she noticed the photo of her old Delta team again. She picked it up, her thumb brushing over the dusty frame. "We made it," she whispered softly, as if her fallen teammates could still hear her. There was a gentle knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Lieutenant Rayner and Sergeant Lopez standing there. Both looked nervous but proud. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Lopez asked. Sarah smiled. "Always." Lopez nodded. "I just wanted to say, I've served under good leaders, but I've never seen anyone like you out there. You didn't just lead us, you made us believe in ourselves." Rayner added, "You didn't hesitate, not even once. I was scared, but watching you, it was like, you already knew how everything would play out." Sarah laughed softly. "Trust me, Lieutenant, no one ever knows how it will play out. You just do your best, and you don't let fear take control." Rayner nodded thoughtfully. "I'll remember that." "Good," she said with a smile, "because one day you'll be the one leading. And when that happens, don't forget, strength isn't about shouting orders. It's about standing steady when others can't." They both saluted her. As they turned to leave, Lopez hesitated. "Captain." "Yes. Before the mission, I heard the story about the coffee and the ring. I just want you to know, you changed how I see things. You showed us what respect really means." Sarah's expression softened. "Then it was worth it," she said quietly. "Every moment of it." When they left, Sarah sat by the window watching the base buzz with life. Helicopters flew overhead, soldiers trained in the distance, and officers moved quickly between buildings. She realized something. The world she had once fought to protect was still moving forward, and she had played her part in keeping it that way. A few hours later, She was called once again to the general's office. When she entered, he stood by the window holding a small box. "Captain Collins," he said, turning toward her. "Headquarters reviewed your mission report. They've approved a recommendation for commendation. You've earned this." He opened the box to reveal a medal, a symbol of honor and bravery. Sarah looked at it quietly for a moment, then said softly, "With respect, sir, I'd rather not accept it." The general raised an eyebrow. "May I ask why?" She smiled faintly. "Because my reward isn't in medals, sir. It's in seeing the people I led come back alive. That's all I ever wanted." The general stared at her for a moment, then slowly smiled. "You truly are one of a kind, Captain." He closed the box and said, "Still, your story deserves to be told. The new recruits, they need someone to look up to. I'm assigning you to lead tactical training next month. You'll teach them what it really means to serve." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I'll do my best, sir." "I know you will," he said with a proud smile. When she left the office, she felt lighter. The journey that had begun with mockery, being asked to serve coffee in a room full of men who didn't see her, had come full circle. She had proven herself not with words, but with actions. And now she was going to teach others to do the same. That evening, she walked across the training grounds, where the young soldiers were still running drills. One of them stopped to salute her. "Good evening, ma'am." Sarah returned the salute and said, "Keep your head up, soldier. Every great mission starts with small steps." As she walked on, the setting sun cast long shadows behind her. The wind carried the sound of helicopters and laughter across the field. Felt like hope. She touched her Delta ring once more, a quiet smile on her face. That ring had once been a secret, a symbol of who she was. But now it was more than that. It was a reminder that no matter how people judge you, the truth always finds its way out. Sarah Collins, the woman they once told to pour coffee, had become the soldier everyone now saluted. She looked up at the horizon and whispered, "For all who served, and for those still fighting." And as the last light of day faded, one thing became clear: legends don't need to be loud. Sometimes, they walk quietly among us, teaching, guiding, and reminding the world that true strength doesn't ask for recognition. Simply shows up, again and again. And that was who Captain Sarah Collins would always be. Not the ghost of Kandahar anymore, but something greater. A living symbol of courage, humility, and honor.